Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we explore the science and practice of compassion and how it can transform lives. Today, I'm joined by Rory Cahill, a psychotherapist, lecturer, and trainer who's passionate about making well-being and mental health training engaging, accessible, and most importantly, effective. Rory has delivered evidence-based wellbeing workshops across businesses, schools, universities, and the NHS, and he specialises in compassion-focused therapy. One of Rory's great skills is bringing compassion and wellbeing training to people who might not always be open to it, whether in corporate settings, education, or healthcare. His energy and enthusiasm for this work really come through in our conversation as he shares how he makes wellbeing training both relevant and transformative. And now he's taking his work further with the Saldo Wellbeing Platform. Saldo means balance in Portuguese, and that's exactly what this platform aims to create, helping individuals and organisations build resilience, mental fitness, and emotional well-being in a way that truly lasts. So let's dive in to this fascinating conversation. And so I bring you Rory Cahill.
Thanks.
All right, well, Rory Cahill, welcome
Indeed.
to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Awesome. Thank you, Stan. Thank you for having me. Like I say, love what you guys are doing with this, and pleasure to be able to speak about compassion with someone with an expertise like yourself. Like, it's awesome.
Well, excellent, good. Well, actually, where I wanted to start really was with well-being, and I wondered whether you could, sort of, how do you define and maybe conceptualize well-being?
Yeah. Oh, God, we're going straight in there. I like that, Stan. So for me, well-being, like it is just to simplify it in its kind of most basic way, it's just that ability to tap into the feeling of just feeling better about yourself at a particular time. And I think it's just monitoring, like developing that sort of level of self-awareness about where you are at any given moment, about whether you're kind of feeling down, anxious, worried, all the multitude of feelings you can be experienced. But tapping into well-being is usually just that kind of inner sense that things are going well, of knowing in yourself. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because externally you could still be under a lot of stresses in life. There can be a lot going on. But if certain things, if you're able to kind of tap into strategies, tools, and techniques, what I find is it's amazing that even then you're able to either sustain this kind of level of well-being and feeling good in yourself and about yourself, that's able to get you through some really difficult times. And for me, that kind of links with compassion. What compassion is able to do to enhance well-being is amazing. And I just think they go together so well. I think compassion is like the core foundation really to kind of enabling people to tap in and boost their own levels of well-being, I think.
Mm. I mean, it's the old Dalai Lama quote, isn't it? If you want to be happy, practice compassion.
Yes,
If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. There's a sort of
exactly.
a real kind of interaction there between living a compassionate life and having, good psychological well-being.
Yeah, mate, absolutely, absolutely. And it's just been a game changer, like learning from the likes of Paul. And I was just speaking before yourselves, like this the compassion focused therapy community, which has just grown so much over the years. It's just awesome, really, isn't it? To speak and connect with different people, innovating in that field, doing amazing projects across all sorts of settings across the world, from Oz and the UK and further. It's great. It's very inspiring to see what people are doing.
Yeah. You've done a lot of work sort of in businesses, in schools, in universities,
Yeah.
I think, with the NHS and so on, sort of
Yeah.
delivering this well-being training. So what's your approach there with sort of training in well-being and perhaps making it engaging and relevant?
Yeah, no, that's so for us, that's so for me, really, again, the stuff like some of the ideas and concepts of CFT have been like game changing personally for me in terms of helping with my well-being during different times. So like many people who got into CFT, for me it kind of came experientially. So remember reading Paul's book and being blown away by so much of the content in terms of the compassionate mind, like things like the three systems model, being able to really figure out like those different systems for myself, what's going on with my threat system, drive, soothing, how I can get balance, how I can sort of like try and become like bring a great sense of compassion to myself and others. So some of those kind of key concepts for CFT were just so game changing to me. And then when I retrained as a therapist, I kind of like connected, did Paul's training really early on, found it amazing. And then quite early on, I started, because my background was teaching. So I started then lecturing. I did counseling and therapy lecturing and then doing sort of CFT lectures at university. And then what happened was I started to do bigger projects. We were talking about at one of the schools I was working with, we were like, I was doing a lot of one-to-one work, but I said to the head, I was like, look, we can do bigger scale projects here as well. We can do like, whole pupil well-being, whole staff well-being, and sort of look to do high level stuff across the school. And he was like, okay, let's go for this. Like, if you're happy to design for it, design it and lead on it, that sounds great. And that's kind of what we've done. So with the training that we tend to do, and as you say, it's across different settings. I think what's amazing is it kind of works across these different places. I found a really good fusion is getting some of the key ideas and practices from compassion focused therapy, and then sometimes with a more like mainstream non-clinical audience, adding little bits of positive psychology and a few different ideas. I think they can flow really well. And I think key to actually delivering those workshops is just getting people talking, like making it relevant, making it real, talking about what do you guys think about the terms compassion, the like good connotations, negative connotations. Let's just talk about it. That's okay. And what sort of associations I have, and then breaking things down like the three systems model about threat, drive, soothing, about what's happening in people's life, developing that self-awareness and bringing compassion to those experiences. And I think like that really works across the range of settings. And the key to the whole focus is again making it accessible and like encouraging people just to talk and converse with each other. So we'll always, whether it's the Zoom, online or in person, get people time out just to talk in their groups. And then as people are able to feedback in the group, you have these amazing conversations. And it's just very fascinating, enjoyable work, that's Dan.
Mm.
Yeah,
What do
really
you
like
find
it.
in terms of, the skeptics maybe, or I mean, do you notice, I guess the fears, blocks and resistances really, isn't it? I suppose that might arise in
Yeah.
some of these trainings, and does that vary across different industries,
Yeah.
different organizations?
Mate, it's a really good book. Do you know, interesting enough, I was talking, so I was doing a workshop in like a software company up in Birmingham. This was like, it was 2 weeks ago. And we were talking, again, bringing in with this idea is the definition of compassion. I was speaking to people about their definition, their associations, good, bad, in between, what the connotations are. But I've noticed, because thinking about, I've been doing these sorts of workshops for sort of coming up to about 10 years now. And I actually found like in the early days of meeting more people with kind of some negative concepts of it, right? And one of the main ones being this idea of compassion just being soft and like and fluffy and stuff like that. And funnily enough, when I was initially pitching to do compassion-based well-being projects with this head years ago, he was like, okay, I think we need to definitely explore, improve the well-being of the school, but with the compassion stuff, what does that involve? Like, do you get people to hold hands and stuff? So it's really funny, isn't it? Like to hear people's kind of associations about what compassion means, and some of the kind of key ideas being like, is it just weak? Is it soft? But then you can get those ideas and say, absolutely, that might be kind of connotations, thoughts you guys have, and that's fair. But then when we bring it to that CFT definition, awareness of suffering in self and others with a commitment to alleviate, prevent. So just in that most simple way, I'm aware someone around me suffering and I want to act to help them. But so to simplify it, it's actually a really good thing, a powerful thing. When you've experienced compassion, it is a good thing. When you've been compassionate to others, that feels good. And so so some of the process, although I find it less so now because like overwhelmingly there's more positive connotations, but still like getting people's definitions is important. And I actually find that quite enjoyable to go in and debunk these ideas of compassion just being soft or weak or fluffy. And again, bringing those real life conversations and examples, I think, can help to break that down a bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So there's an emphasis there on a compassionate mind kind of psychoeducation, I guess, that you're sort of
yeah,
exploring some of the tricky brain, the three circles model, some of the loops in the
yeah,
mind, I guess, where compassion fits in, trying to define or sort of work with people to define compassion, working with
yeah,
some of those blocks that might arise and so on. And it's often, yeah, just those kind of same old blocks that so many people can
Yeah.
confront, I guess, when they're thinking about compassion or let alone self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right with that stuff because there's so much stuff, isn't there, about like fears and blocks and resistances. And it's really important to have that awareness of those things. And as you said, and then looking at that kind of triangle of the different modes of compassion, compassion to others, compassion, self-compassion, and compassion from others. And it's really interesting just to look at that kind of triangle and get people discussing about, which of these like feels more like in line with something that you feel naturally good at. And for so many people as well, thinking about like in the helping professions in teaching and in the NHS and stuff like that, so many people are very adept and focused on their compassion to others, which is great, isn't it? But then self-compassion and accepting compassion from others can be particularly tricky areas. So we're kind of like looking at that and having conversations about it and then just acknowledging the balance because if it is focused solely on to others and that's the only focus. It's all about two others. The burnout becomes quite. The likelihood of burnout becomes quite increased, doesn't it? So it's that
Yeah.
idea that even if we're able just to rebalance a little bit and start to slowly develop a bit more self-compassion, it's just a game changer, really.
Mm. I had a
Yeah.
really interesting question from a person I'm working with at the moment recently. I'd be curious to hear what you think because her block wasn't so much that it was weak or soft or too fluffy or those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Hers was more in and around compassionate engagement versus compassionate action, and that
Mm.
she felt that she was in a kind of a helping sort of child focused job as well, and she felt that she was quite good already at sensitivity to suffering, that she was
Yeah.
able to engage with that. She felt like an empathic person and felt
Yeah.
sympathy towards others and was able to be non-judgmental and kind of committed to caring and so on. What she found hard was effective action. Like what could she do? How could she actually help to alleviate or prevent the suffering? And the block was more that it was a sort of a block around just not being sure how to be effective and am I being effective and the same concern really then related to receiving compassion as well, that
Mm.
she could sense that other people might be sensitive but they might not quite offer what she needed or offer compassionate action effectively.
Yeah.
Break that down a bit for us. I mean, how would you talk about that or respond to that sort of thing?
Oh man, that's a really fascinating example, Stan. So I think for that, I think breaking down the context, I think a lot of it as well is kind of that subjectivity, right? About what feels like for that individual person, what feels like an appropriate course of compassion, right? Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because two people could be thinking of like someone who kind of needs a sense of support, right? They might have a friend who is struggling with a breakup or something like that. And two people could come at it from very, very different angles, and both of which could frame it as I'm going to be compassionate to this person. One might go for a real kind of gentle, arm around them approach and that kind of very sort of like traditional nurturing. And another person could be like, right, we need to get you on it. We need to wake you up, get you out of your comfort zone, and be a kind of attack it in a different way. And so both of them are being compassionate in terms of their own frame of reference, but the way it comes across is quite different. So I think for that person, I think it'd be really interesting to sort of break that down a bit about, so is that right that they have that sense of a feeling of compassion, but they're not sure about what the right type of compassion act. Is that right, Stan, in terms of
Yes,
how to act to support and stuff?
and being effective, I think, was her key point. Sort of being effective for others, but also others being effective for her. To actually achieve a sort of a helpfulness, a helpful
Yeah, yeah.
alleviation of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think on the first one about being helpful to others, I think that's like and it again interesting to know the kind of context of like who she's kind of working with, the age range and stuff, and their kind of ability to feedback. But I always just find it very useful as well. I'd say, for example, in therapy, even from like teenage years and upwards, to kind of check in with people and be like, how did you find, so when you're doing things around CFT or whatever it is, and like bringing imagery practices, stuff like that, having reflections like how did that feel? What was that good for you? Not so good? And have those honest bits of communication. And I think it's really interesting because some people like engage with things very differently. So like for example, like as a simple process directly from CFT, some people I found really engaged, say, with their compassionate other imagery really well, and that can take off like having another figure in your mind that embodies a sense of compassion, stepping into that. Other people struggle with that one a bit more, but prefer things like tapping into a compassionate self. But actually having those honest bits of communication about what are you finding helpful or not helpful about this, and we can sort of evolve that too.
Mm,
And then on the second bit, I think that's really interesting that they're trying to find those things, that sense of what feels like the right compassion to them individually. And I think that's a really massive one. And I think just having that self-awareness, like almost that bit of reflective time to think about, like, again, in that ideal sort of way, if I really do want that care from someone, and if I'm really going to benefit from a sense of what would it look like? How would it look like to me? And again, you've got that subjectivity because what someone might need at a particular time in terms of that time in their life or their individual preferences can be really quite different. So do they need kind of a traditional bit of nurturing? Do they need someone to kind of be like warm and upfront with them and kind of even tactile and have those sorts of things? Or do they want it in a different way? They want someone to kind of take them off on adventures and do these things and be more kind of active and out there. And that can look quite differently. So I think that in just encouraging that client to really slow down and ask themselves that what do they actually personally want from that sense of compassion? And
mm,
then hopefully if they have those good relationships, they can have kind of honest conversations about how to seek to find that, like how they
mm,
can actually ask for those bits of help and support from others and develop it in a bit of a reciprocal way, I think. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, it really speaks to the wisdom piece, doesn't it? I guess of Paul's model,
Absolutely.
the quality of wisdom and wise action. You know, that sometimes
Yeah.
we can make a bit of a boo-boo with our efforts to be compassionate by perhaps not quite being there in with the wisdom, with really understanding the other person and what might be helpful. And so there's a sort of and it sounds like it's really deeply embedded in your training as well, just that idea of the interaction and the inquiry and sort of the back and forth and the way that helps to shape the understanding and therefore the wise action, what might be helpful for that person. But it is always
Yeah.
interesting, actually, now that you mention it, that to receive compassion also takes wisdom too, reflection into
Absolutely.
oneself and to think about what is it that I really need, what would be most helpful, and also how can I express that? How can I sort of express to others what it might be that I need or would be helpful? And so
Yeah.
there's two dilemmas there. Is there someone in my life who can actually offer me that? And what is it that I can sort of, I guess, ask for? Is that the right, or at least
Yeah.
sort of offer them some sort of idea about what would actually help?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like, I think that's a really like huge thing. And I think when people are actually able to have those conversations, whether it's in a relationship, like an intimate relationship or friendship or a family member, or even like a colleague and stuff like that, just being able to like say like bring those bits of communication that honestly like I really like value really like when we're able to do this or we can sort of interact in this way or we have this time together doing these things and just being open about those things like and I think that can be a really powerful thing just communicating like that sort of level of your needs
Mm,
and then if it's the right sort of person to give it to you they can like often see how much that kind of works for you and often again in that reciprocal way they're enjoying giving that sense of compassion to you so you can create these like win-win situations and just really like increase that relational depth as well I like as another psychological concept if you're like open about those needs and you're able to build those into your relationship I think it's immensely powerful that
mm. And that's the power of compassion and well-being, I guess, really, isn't
yeah
it? It's sort of where you're really coming from. I mean, but it takes a lot of courage to do all of that too, to
yeah
actually front up to somebody and talk to them about what is it they need or what is it I need, or to have those conversations. But when it
absolutely I
when it
totally
works and when
agree.
it flows, it really yeah, well, it seems to be helpful for all involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. That's it. That's a win-win then, a win-win. And you can kind of really build it into that relationship style, which is great.
So does that mean that self-compassion, where in a funny sort of a way you are the giver and the receiver, does that
Yeah.
mean that self-compassion should be easier, Rory?
Oh, that's a good question. If only. If only. I think it's really interesting to just, yeah, again, ask people of those kind of different modes of compassion, of that flow of compassion to others, self-compassion, accepting from others, like which and people are, I think, are very good and astute at being like, oh yeah, like it's a very common picture that people can feel like quite adept at giving it to others. But as we know, as you know, and many people like in the therapy and CFT world, there can be some really significant blocks around that idea of self-compassion, about what that means, about what that looks like. And I think multiple factors can contribute to that. Messages from family, messages about what's right, message from society and stuff like that. And then kind of misconceptions as well about that idea about taking time for yourself and your needs. Like, and I think there is a lot more of a focus on the benefits of those things now. If you kind of look at that idea of self-care and well-being and these sorts of concepts, right? Like even over the last decade or so, about how much that's more in people's conversations and psyche, but they can still be like some very old school perceptions. Oh, you can't do that. That's selfish and stuff like that. So there can be a lot of a lot of factors that can block those things. So they can need a bit of picking apart sometimes for sure. And then again, that one about accepting compassion from others, that's a huge one. There can be multiple blockers there, can't there? Especially when people have had bits of trauma or abuse or really challenging aspects of their relationships. There can be that natural sense of suspicion around other people and whether to accept that level of care from them. And that can make sense in the context of their experience. So it's about trying to break those down and also making those judgment calls about who are the right people that you can accept that level of care and compassion from. So there's a lot to those things, isn't there?
Yeah,
For
there's a lot.
sure.
There's a lot. We have tricky brains, I guess,
Yeah,
is the point.
that is for sure. Paul is
And
right about that. Like about
and I
many things. That's
I
true.
I think you're alluding there, yeah, to the way that I guess fear and vulnerability and even shame and certain shame memories and the way that that might create shame-based self-criticism and that does seem
Yeah,
to be a real blocker for self-compassion, certainly is
yeah,
and this sort of paradoxical thing where we would never say the sorts of things that we say to ourselves to someone else, if we were wanting
absolutely.
to be helpful. And yet there it is. It comes from that, perhaps that history and the origins are way back there. And these
Yeah.
seeds have been planted around, especially self-criticism and shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, and they can just become so profound. And that's it. Like the way we often speak to ourselves is just so brutal. We wouldn't even consider saying it to other people, even people you don't really get on with, but you just never even consider it. But that level of self-criticism and shame can just become so brutal and
Mm,
tear people down in such like a disastrous way at times, just
mm,
not the well-being, make people feel awful. And then, but being able to kind of slowly change things, slowly tap into a bit of self-compassion is can be a massive game changer, right?
mm. Yeah.
Yeah, really can.
The you mentioned kind of like an IT kind of audience and but
Yeah.
teachers as well, really, or I guess health staff or well, people in a law firm or accounting firm. I mean, wherever
Yeah.
we are, or perhaps even on the tools and sort of we never have a lot of time. I think that
Yes.
seems to. I mean, we've been talking about some sort of kind of bigger blocks, I guess, so far. But sometimes it's just time as well. And actually, before we got on, we were talking about had I been surfing, and
Yes.
I sort of I think I even let slip. I didn't really have a lot of time. I mean, what about that
Yes.
one? Like how do you deal with that in your trainings and when you're working with people who are, effective people, very successful, hardworking, but obviously on a little bit of a road away from well-being and towards something more like fatigue or burnout.
Yeah, abs so that's a great point. And again, yeah, it was really interesting to have that conversation because for us as just busy people anyway, it's like, how do you fit the time, that time for a bit of self-care and break from some of the more challenging aspects of life is a big one. But so I think there's a couple of things that, like, so say for example, when we're going into a company to do these projects. So for me, if we're doing a compassion-based wellbeing project in a company, right? So the people we're speaking to is kind of the HR leads, who are usually acknowledging that there's kind of a level of stress and difficulty and challenge, and that different people are struggling. So what we'll try and do is try and say, okay, so we can do these projects in different ways, and a time to suit you. But for example, like a really good way is saying, like, we can put on a time slot. Say we could do a day's training, like an hour per day at a time that suits you. And again, so like, how can we work it into your schedule without taking, like, loads of time away from your people who are super busy? But obviously this is important stuff. So a lot of the time it's either kind of looking at sessions. Say you might do 6 sessions over like a fortnightly basis, or maybe even a monthly basis. And kind of the idea of that is just an hour every couple of weeks for someone to come on and kind of listen to some of this content and think about and reflect, and then take and embed that learning. And I think if you're able to kind of like find a way of doing it, that seems like a really reasonable amount of time. Because thinking of like an hour every couple of weeks, like half an hour a week, let's have a specific focus time on purely on well-being, away from all of the work side, the pressures, all of that sort of stuff. But the idea really, as we're talking about these ideas and concepts, what we're doing is like raising people's self-awareness, helping them to develop psychological insights, thinking about ideas, tools, and strategies, and how they can apply them in their lives. So when they can go away and process those things, they've got that clear hour, and then also the processing time in between to think, well, actually, yeah, I'm now back in this kind of situation, and work will naturally bring up like threat-based drive. That's pretty natural for most places of work. But then they can just start to actively think, well, actually, what can I do to implement a bit more soothing here? Because actually, we know that if I'm able to do that, I'm going to be able to perform and do that level of drive to a much, much better extent. So kind of the first thing is just working those bits of training and stuff into that schedule is super, super important. But I actually think as well that once you're getting people talking, I think you've got different things, because you can access things through platform, online, YouTube, podcast. There's multiple ways of learning about these things, which is amazing. So we're in an amazing time where we can listen and learn to these psychological concepts, and get learning really quickly. But as well, once you have those ideas and kind of can build an understanding of the importance of rebalancing the threat, the drive, the soothing system, and how important that is, then it's about, I think, just working those things into your schedule. So when we're like speaking to people in companies, obviously it's super important to be able to take proper breaks and holidays and have proper downtime. But sometimes in terms of practical strategies of what people can do to de-stress in those kind of high level environments are like actually getting the hell out of the office or working from home for that lunch break, and actually taking that full lunch break to either get your food and go for a walk, and then actually proactively being proactive. I'm going to have a 10-15 minute phone call with one of my mates and colleagues just to have a bit of a catch up today, and just kind of check in with them and see where they're at, just to have a bit of a chat ourselves, and building those sorts of things into the schedule. And then for other people as well, it is things like, well, actually, I know that actually certain bits of music have really helped me to kind of soothe and de-stress. Certain podcasts help me to do that. Walking, taking the dog out, all of these sorts of things. So it's kind of like trying then to build those strategies into your everyday life to reduce the likelihood of it getting super heavy in the threat-based drive, and becoming burnt out. So I think, yeah, you've got the time within the company and just acknowledging the importance of that, and then the companies we're working in acknowledge that it's important to have that. And then once you have those understandings of the importance of it, it's just trying to build it in. And as you say, sometimes that's like 10-15 minutes a day to do something that's not on, and just taking those breaks. Like that to me is one of the most simple but profound things that people will come back like, I'm actually taking my breaks now. I feel way better for it. It means when I come back, like I can just perform better, like from that kind of practical sort of like business focused stuff. Like it's super important, isn't it? And it's really easy to lose that. I think it's really easy to lose it. And when
Mm.
people do, I think that can only be sustained over a certain level of time before people get jaded, tired, burnt out. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah. No, I love that idea. It's sort of almost like the training program itself starts to create a bit of a pattern for
Yeah.
them, where they sort of they're able to have that hour that's kind of cordoned off a little bit as a sort of a self-care hour, and then that
Yeah,
sets up for the implementation into their life. And
yeah,
I like that idea. It's kind of, I mean, the bigger holidays and things like that are good, but it's sort of also it's the brief but frequent things that we do, isn't it? You know,
absolutely.
and I had a fellow I was talking to recently. He's a lovely guy and a very, very hard worker, and you know, sort of stressed and so on. And we'd been talking about, um, actually it was, you know, going paddleboarding or something like that,
Oh,
and
nice.
how that was an act of self-compassion, and you know that it
Totally.
might help to, you know, sort of alleviate things a bit. And he told me this week that he was out paddleboarding during the week or something, and he thought to himself, "Damn you, Stan, it works," sort of thing.
Yeah, love that. Stan, you were bloody
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And so we had a good chuckle about that. But yeah, it's often, yeah, just quick walk with the dog, or popping down to the beach, or heading up to the local park, or having or reading or listening to it. You know, there's just so many possible. It's anything really, isn't it? But
Yeah,
it's how to sort of slot that in these little brief but frequent kind of ways to as an act of self-compassion and self-care.
yeah, and the thing is, then you just notice the difference so profoundly because it was fun. Like I was lecturing at Warwick Uni a couple of years back on their kind of counselling degree course, and we had a COVID lockdown, right? So we all went straight to being online, right? So I think a lot of people can relate to this. And so
Mm.
I was working with great colleagues. My two colleagues, like Marie and Natasha, were brilliant, and so we were setting stuff up and getting teams set up, and then what we were starting at the start, like colleagues were like, okay, well, let's have a little catch up over the lunchtime just to check on the afternoon stuff and like make sure the planning's okay. And we were doing this in the first week or two, and then I don't know, I was like, guys, I was like, we've been on the computer from like 8:45 to 5 o'clock. I was like, I don't know how you guys are, but I'm exhausted. Like this is exhausting to me. I was like, I think we just need, like for me, I think it would be like we need to shift things and just take those mini breaks and stuff away for proper cup of tea. And I was like, I just need to get for a walk outside that. And they were like, okay, actually that makes sense. And we implemented that like after 2 weeks, and then the three of us were like, oh man, this is so better. Like we can email stuff to this like between sessions, after sessions, or even have a little call here and there at a time that suits. But actually, in those days, we need those breaks because I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that you could be sat down for like the course of a day on a screen. But to me, that is just so shattering. If I've like not had a bit of fresh air or something like that, I like that energy level is just going to decline so badly. So yeah, just being practical about those things is a game changer. And then we all were like in total agreement. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's kind of sustain this. This
Yes.
works a lot better. And then yeah, for people, I think it's really fascinating that it is often those little things, Dan. It's often those little things, the mini breaks here and there, and just getting out the office, getting out that home for even like 15, 20 minutes is just a game changer at
Mm.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If fun, it's sort of a bit of a fun time for a segue, because sort of speaking of sitting on the computer, but you have sort of released recently, uh, Saldo Wellbeing
Yeah.
Platform. I first
Yeah.
came across it, I think, in recent months. Really, you were announcing it on LinkedIn and so on, and
Yeah.
yeah, it looks like this very interesting sort of application of all of this psychoeducation and various skills and the well-being kind of stuff
Yeah.
online. So what is Saldo, and how does it work, and who's it for, and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dan. Absolutely. So Saldo is the name of my company. So I set up the company Saldo at the start of 2021, actually kind of in relation to this sort of stuff, the online world, the pandemic and stuff like that. So as I've
Mm,
been doing a lot of training, like mental health and well-being training, using the compassion focus model and bits of psychology, and I've done lots of stuff in school. So my background was teaching, worked as a therapist in schools quite quickly, was doing a lot of lecturing and then starting to build up these bigger projects, doing some stuff working with Paul at Derby and some other researchers and doing some of my own stuff. And then actually sort of I started to give you the background story. I started a LinkedIn in 2020 and then started to get contacted by some businesses like, oh, our staff are struggling a little bit. Can you do some Zoom sessions? So I started doing these different Zooms. And then it was interesting actually when we first started up the company. A friend of mine, he was doing like he's got like a really high level videography company, and he was doing these kind of things for like these corporate trainers and stuff like that who were struggling. They couldn't do in-person stuff. He was using this high level tech, and he was like, do you know, would this work for your like mental health and well-being training? I was like, let's give it a go. So at the start of 2021, I rang up one of the clients who really liked one of our Zooms, and I said, look, I'm thinking of doing like, instead of just a one-off, like doing full 6 sessions, which covers like CFT, positive psychology, purpose, logotherapy, the full whack, but wanted to do it in kind of engaging way. Like they were a gaming company, so like had to have like visually engaging stuff as well, and that sort of side of things. I like to do 6 sessions for as many people who'd like to come if you're interested. And the director was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Speak to HR, and if they're in, we're in. And spoke to HR, just had an informal meeting in this room, like on Zoom, and they were like, that sounds perfect. When can you start? So I was like, okay, well, let's do this properly. So set up the company, and we started doing projects like that across different businesses, in schools as well. But like the whole idea was to like do this kind of engaging stuff that we could have the high level visuals, but essentially do this kind of proper evidence-based mental health and wellbeing training across different places, businesses and schools. So that's how it's set up. And Saldo, the name actually means balance. It's a Finnish and Spanish word for balance. So it felt like an appropriate thing. And we sort
Gotcha.
of grown from there and done different projects across different places. And then after the second year, I was like, we got really good feedback on the training. And so I thought, well, actually, if we were to create it in terms of getting bite-sized videos for people just to check in their own time, whether they're new to the training or whether they've done it before and want to have refreshers and stuff like that. I think people like there's a power in people just being able to access stuff like on demand whenever they feel like they need it. So again, went to one of the companies and said, we're thinking about doing this. And they were like, look, if you're doing that with the high level videos, we'll just buy it. So we set it up, we converted the training using the high level videography, and then we sold it in-house to this company for 2 years, and they really loved it and said, we're just good to have that. So I thought, okay, great. And so we're just now bringing that out to other people. So just selling it into kind of other companies. Some of the schools are interested. Some individuals are just buying it for themselves. And essentially, so it's a kind of breakdown as it stands at the moment of like, we've got 6 core modules that cover CFT, positive psychology, logotherapy. There's a bunch of different meditations that people can access, and they're done in like short, sharp, bite-sized videos. So you can break down and just go to whichever area you want. And as I say, like we think about timing, a lot of people are kind of a bit time poor. So you could just spend like, 5, 10, 15 minutes getting a couple of insights from CFT or positive psychology, or doing a 5-minute meditation to kind of like develop that self-awareness and have that boost in terms of well-being. So yeah, that's what the kind of platform is at the moment. And again, initial feedback's good, and we're just adapting it and sort of adding more content to it as we keep going. So yeah, it feels exciting. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's
no,
just
wonderful.
another way of engaging people in the content.
Yeah. Yeah, and also nice. It's sort of like a product that people can access. It makes things more accessible and from a time point of
Yeah.
view and so on. Something that companies can offer their staff, but also by the sounds of it, individuals can access. I'll
Yeah.
put all the links to these things obviously in the description or whatever,
Yeah.
and that is
Awesome.
interesting to know that individuals can access it as well. Now, one
Yeah.
thing that really sparked my curiosity um, was the logotherapy. So I
Yeah.
kind of, as many of us did, read Man's Search for Meaning, and
Oh my
Viktor
gosh.
Frankl was a massive grade 11, I think, inspiration for me to want to be a psychologist and all the rest of it. So how are you bringing that in? I know it's a little bit of a different topic from well, maybe it's not. Yeah, what's the way that
Well, so,
logotherapy
so
comes
it's
into it?
really so essentially stuff when we were kind of designing the program, when I was designing the program, I was like, what do I feel kind of for you to like simplify an organization? Been doing lots of projects around CFT and bringing in bits of a positive psychology too, but I was kind of thinking like, what kind of a sort of key ideas if we were to simplify it down into like say 6 sessions, which again is a like good time frame to be able to really kind of measure and gain a sense of impact. What are some of the key ideas and concepts and messages? And of course, CFT was a natural fit and is a natural fit. There's so many ideas that really work well. Elements of positive psychology, really, really good. But there was another thing, and it kind of came up quite naturally when I was doing these kind of compassion based. So, for example, we were able to do like a really long piece of an optional well-being group at a school. It was like we've got an SEMH school for young people with social, emotional, mental health difficulties. So it's kind of a high stress environment. So you've got a lot of young people who've experienced quite serious trauma. So for the staff members, they're kind of dealing with that, and sometimes like there can be some levels of violence against staff at the school. So it can be quite a stressful environment. But we did these kind of well-being projects, right? And so we did some CFT intro stuff, and we had weekly groups. But then it was really interesting that actually the subject of purpose started to come up so much in these sessions. So I started to bring some of the stuff around Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, tapping into a sense of meaning and purpose, and bring those into these compassion focused sessions, and it landed really well. And then when I kind of took a step back, I was like, I actually think these three modes actually work super well together, of the CFT, the positive psychology, and the logotherapy. And actually, if you can get people talking and reflecting about being able to deal, like awareness of the mind, development of compassion, dealing with difficult emotions from CFT, identifying their strengths and stuff from positive psychology, and like different kind of things like the PERMA model in terms of thinking about those different aspects of well-being that can boost their lives, but then also tapping into a sense of meaning and purpose individually, and bringing in those ideas from Viktor Frankl and also bits from Ikigai, which fits really nicely. That felt like a holistic picture. So we kind of brought that to the training, and again, it's one of the areas that really lands well. And some people will focus like very much on that side of purpose because, as you know, like, I mean, Man's Search for Meaning, saying like, I read that book years ago, like quite a long time before I retrained as a therapist, and it just blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And the
Mm.
fact Viktor Frankl's story is just mind blowing. The fact that he lived those experiences and then had that vision, like about getting people to tap into a sense of purpose to really overcome brutally difficult times, and he had that in such a powerful, incredible way in his life, is amazing. So, and I just think that's amazing. Like as a subject, it's great. Like, and like there's other things that kind of fit into that. Like you can often find you're talking about concepts with people about post-traumatic growth, right? So a lot of people who've experienced these traumas but processed them and found ways of developing a sense of meaning are going on, and they're just doing incredible things, aren't they?
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
I feel like that approach works really well with the others, and can kind
Mm.
of, you can speak to an audience across settings about these things and like get them to tap into it. It feels powerful, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, by the time our conversation comes out in on video, I will have published, I think, a little video essay about happiness and compassion. And in doing that, I was looking at Sonia Lubomirsky's work. Is that how you pronounce?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
oh, it's interesting you say that because she might think of subjective well-being as overall life satisfaction, emotional balance, and meaning and purpose. And so it does sound
Yeah.
like you are really coming at each of those pieces with the different elements that you've got. Does CFT kind of address meaning and purpose, do you think, or is it perhaps dare I say it, like a sort of a little bit missing there from the CFT model?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think people can use CFT without necessarily tapping into that side of meaning and purpose, right? It can be used without that, but I think certainly it fits nicely. I think you can fuse it together to get people to think about those things. So for example, like when you're developing that awareness of the mind, like again, going back, I talk about the three systems so much, but I think it's such a profound model. And I think one of the beauties about it is, like I say, I've worked a lot in schools, but worked with people from like, like 8 to like their 80s, right? But everyone understands that model. Like if you explain
Yes.
to them in their way, everyone gets the idea of threat and drive and soothing and that balance of things. And I think it's sometimes for people who are quite visual and like to sketch it out and think about it, I think it's really quite useful to think about, as people are looking forward to the future, having those kind of sense of like goals about what they want to achieve, but really tapping in. So sometimes your kind of drive system will be related a lot to threat, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing. Sometimes life is threatening and you can deal with it in that way. But actually looking at the top end goals, like what feel like really purposeful, meaningful goals that intrinsically feel really good and powerful to you, sort of sketching them out, and like as things that you really want to kind of develop in the future is super powerful. And then thinking about how you can sort of balance your systems to work towards those very meaningful goals. I think those conversations are really powerful. And then when you do imagery, like CFT based imagery, and for example, when people engage with things like the compassionate other, it's amazing what those self-reflections can develop and the sense of meaning and purpose that can be tapped into when you're really developing a sense of compassion and asking yourselves like, how do I come over this difficult time? What do I really want from my life? And actually some of those thoughts that are developed in your mind from that compassionate perspective really fit and align with this individual sense of meaning and purpose. So I think it can be done separately, but they actually work really well together.
Yeah, I'm going to think a bit more about it too, because I suppose that CFT sometimes might not specifically look at topics of meaning and purpose, or
Yeah,
maybe I should say explicitly.
yeah,
It's implicit, certainly, as people are sort of exploring their compassion, that compassionate part of them, their compassionate selves, and what's helpful and not harmful, and all the rest of it. But to bring in something like logotherapy, which really does a much more explicit take on that, and
yeah.
puts it to the forefront, does seem like a very useful, pairing there.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
so they seem to fit really nicely together. And that's it. And also with those elements of the positive psychology, I think it feels like a really nice fusion there. And as I said, you can speak to audience like we said earlier. It doesn't matter if it could be a gaming audience, they could be accountants, they could be lawyers. It like across the like you can get people talking about these concepts and develop a real a real kind of powerful reflections around these subjects. And that's
mm.
essentially what it's doing about bringing these subjects, these therapeutic subjects, just bringing them to life and getting people to self-reflect, talk about them and think about how they can sort of implement them in their day-to-day life. Yeah.
Where do you see these sorts of digital tools like your well-being platform? I mean, where do you see them heading, and perhaps even
Yeah.
shaping the future of
Well,
well-being?
that's it. So I really do think I think they're going to be a significant part of the well-being offerings, whether through like businesses, schools, individually. I think having access to things like a platform and apps and stuff like that, being able to access something so quickly, speedily on your phone, but that has quality content, I think it's a real game changer. So I think I do see those things growing, and like I said, we've been doing some research around this like in terms of like the market out there, and it seems to be this world of like healthcare and well-being in terms of like apps and platforms just seems to be going up and up because I think it's just ease, accessibility, having the phone, again, low cost, all of these things are really, really massive. Yet at the same time, I believe and think, and this is why we have both sides, is like I still think then there's this an enormous power in being able to do live sessions where you talk about contents and then get people to feedback and talk live, have these discussions as you go and can sort of like, yeah, have them live in the room. And I think there's a power there. And then the other side, I think, as well, is
Mm.
real life people. Like, and I think there's going to be so much development in this world, but I still don't think, and again, in terms of personal experience and seeing the impact on in so many different ways of work that actually directly speaking with a therapist and a psychologist that you can build a relationship with and talk about all of the deep stuff personally. I think all of that's super powerful, but by using kind of things like apps to bring yourself like greater access to those things, I think feel like it's a big time. I think that's going to continue to grow, Stan. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 great.
Yeah.
So I guess last question really, but through all of this work you're doing, the individual work and the group trainings and across all of these different industries and cohorts of people and so on, and
Yeah.
well-being and CFT. I mean, is there a particular insight that's been, that's profoundly shifted, I suppose, how you think about compassion?
Yeah, so oh gosh, is there a particular insight? I think for me, like going back to it, it's the purchase being really frank. Like I am like when I was retraining, so my background, I was working as a teacher for a bit, loved the teaching, but that was crazy. Like, there's so much similar in Oz, but UK, like you're working throughout the evenings and weekends, like it's a crazy, crazy setup. But then essentially I was introduced, I was like, I'd go be fine for a while, then I'd have a dip, and I was like, what's all this about? But then I did. like almost like I was reluctant for a bit, but I eventually accessed a therapist and they introduced me to like the compassionate mind. And it was like, wow, like that was the game changer for me and helped him in terms of my decision. And I think there's the two things I like the simplicity and the beauty of the neuroscience. And I'm quite a visual thinker, so actually thinking about my balance and imbalance of the threat drive soothing is super practical to me. But actually, the reality, actually, when I started to do those practices myself of tapping into that compassionate imagery, like that was a game changer for me. Because again, some of the more logical therapeutic stuff from some of the elements of CBT, which can be great, but some of the more older ones of the logical stuff just didn't really do anything for me. But when I was able to tap into that, this sort of compassionate imagery, I was like, wow, could feel that profound shift in terms of my well-being, my mood, and stuff like that. And that kind of set me on the path to be like, wow, I
Mm.
kind of need to do that. And then on the other end, it's amazing. I think there's something about doing that compassionate imagery which is just amazing. And actually sitting with someone who can be really heightened and anxious and feeling overwhelmed, and within a few minutes, you've just enabled them to slow down and tap in to this kind of sense of calm and a sense of actual compassion through the imagery. I think they're the they've been a game changer for me, and I've seen like the impact it's had on other people. So that feels really profound. So just want to
Mm.
keep growing it. And for me as well, being part of this community, I was just saying with you, Stan, before, like, as I say, love to see what you guys in Australia are doing. Always seem like you're doing great projects, innovative work, but just to see how it's spread and you've got people across the globe doing amazing work in the field, proving the validity, helping people en masse. It's just great to be part of that community doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's sort of the revelation and then the embodiment. It's the kind of the 1-2 really of CFT, I think, that just the way that the psychoeducation just really kind of clicks and makes sense. And then all of those skills and practices and exercises and that felt sense of what it's like to sort of shift into a compassionate
Yeah.
self. Mate,
Exactly. Yeah.
thank
Awesome.
you. Thank you very much for for all the work that you're doing. It sounds like you've touched a lot of lives and people have really appreciated it and benefited from it. So that's amazing work. But also, thank you for coming and speaking with me on compassion in a t-shirt.
Oh, mate, it's all, and again, so thank you so much for having me on. It's a total pleasure. As I hope you've got, but I love being able to speak to people about it. But same with you, Stan, the work that you guys are doing, and again, bringing awareness to people, like with compassion in a t-shirt, speaking to people about compassion, its benefits, what it can do for people is awesome. So, been a total pleasure, and same to you, man. You're doing amazing work, so it's great to see, and thank you.
Thanks very much.